Since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Europe's general position on Russia has undergone a significant change. Many European countries have condemned the military aggression of the Russian regime and stand by Ukraine, whether it is about arms or aid shipments. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, virtually all of Europe has united against Russia, and most European countries have the interest of maintaining peace, freedom, democracy, and justice on the continent. Although the countries and nations of the European continent are typically against Russia, there are still a few countries in Europe that still maintain a positive or at least balanced relationship with Russia to this day, despite the ongoing war in Ukraine. The reasons why some European countries still have good relations with the Russians can mostly be traced back to important topics such as history, politics, society, culture, or even a common religion. Welcome everyone! I'm Alföld Mapping, and in this video I will be talking about the last European allies of Russia, and it will also be shown why these countries maintain good relations with Russia led by Vladimir Putin even after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. Since Russia attacked Ukraine in 2022, Vladimir Putin's regime has lost many allies and partners and has become significantly isolated both politically and economically at the international level. The most difficult situation for Russia is undoubtedly in Europe. Since the outbreak of the war, the member states of the European Union and other European countries have introduced a number of sanctions and bans against Russia, as well as providing a lot of support and assistance to Ukraine. Although the vast majority of European countries stand united against Russia, there are some exceptions in Europe where they differ from this unified approach. There are currently two countries in Europe that still have very good or balanced political and economic relations with Russia to this day. The reasons why these two countries maintain good relations with Russia, in addition to political and economic reasons, can be found in historical events and social attitudes. First up is one of Russia's western neighbors, Belarus, which is currently the closest European ally of Russia. There has been close political, social, and economic cooperation between the two countries for a long time, and the role of integration is also growing more and more in the relations between the two countries. The question may arise, why did Belarus form an alliance with Russia in the first place? The historical roots of the Belarusian people can be traced back to the 9th century. Around 880, the state called Kievan Rus was established in Eastern Europe, whose first leader was Oleg the Wise. Then it became a great power under the leadership of Yaroslav the Wise in the 11th century. The state became Orthodox after the Byzantine Empire spread the religion in Eastern Europe. Kievan Rus was the first independent medieval state of the Slavic tribes living in the eastern part of Europe, and today it is considered to be the first state of the ancestors of the three Eastern Slavic nations, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and the Belarusians, and that the language and culture of the aforementioned three nations were later formed here. During the 13th century, as a result of the Mongol attacks, the increasingly unstable Kievan Rus finally disintegrated, and the Belarusian territories, among with the Eastern Slavs living there, although they avoided the destruction of the Mongols, came under the authority of various foreign empires in the following centuries. In the 13th century, the territory of today's Belarus became part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and in 1569, after the unification of Poland and Lithuania, it came under Polish rule. During the next 200 years, the Polish leadership carried out a strong Polonization in the eastern areas of the empire, which aimed to convert the Belarusian and Ukrainian inhabitants of the eastern part of the empire into Poles and to change their religions from Eastern Orthodoxy to Catholicism. From the end of the 18th century until World War I, the Belarusian territories were part of the Russian Empire. It happened during the First World War in 1918, after the Germans and Russians signed the Brest-Litovsk peace treaty, the German army occupied Belarus and the first Belarusian state was established in the territory whose official name is the Belarusian Democratic Republic. Although it was the first state of the Belarusian nation, it was not actually independent but was under German occupation until 1919 when the territory was occupied by Soviet Russia. The Bolsheviks created the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, where the Belarusian language became official. The Belarusian SSR was one of the 4 founding member states of the Soviet Union in December 1922, and unlike the previous occupying powers, the Soviet leadership recognized Belarus as an independent nation. During the Second World War, Belarus suffered severe destruction and was under German occupation during Operation Barbarossa. In the 1940s, the occupying Germans killed more than 150,000 Belarusians and caused severe damage to the Belarusian population. Finally, in 1944, the Red Army liberated Belarus from the Third Reich. During the Cold War, Belarus was a member republic of the Soviet Union. Industrialization, job creation, migration from villages to cities, and collectivization took place. Meanwhile, the policy of Russification appeared more and more strongly in the Soviet Union. In those times, from a political and economic point of view, along with Russia, Belarus was considered a model member republic within the Soviet Union. In addition to economic development, there was a lot of linguistic and cultural cooperation between the Belarusian and Russian nations. In addition to the Russian leadership, the Belarusian leadership also contributed to the policy of promoting socialism and Russification in other territories of the USSR, such as in Ukraine, Moldova, or the Baltic states. Finally, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the independent state of Belarus was established for the first time. However, while the economy was transitioning to a free market economy, several inflation and an economic crisis soon developed in the country, and it also became evident that they are heavily dependent on Russia in many economic situations. Thanks to this, a certain Alexander Lukashenko, who was already a politician during the Soviet Union, came to the fore. In his campaign, he promised nationalization, social benefits, and stable jobs, and since in the 1990s most of the Belarusian people already missed the stability from Soviet times, Lukashenko was elected president of the country in 1994 in an election that cannot be called democratic. Among Lukashenko's first measures were nationalization, the reintroduction of socialist symbols, a showdown against the Belarusian opposition, and strengthening relations with Russia. On April 2, 1997, Belarus and Russia signed a treaty in Moscow on the creation of a common union. The joint union between Russia and Belarus, better known as the Union State, was officially formed on December 8, 1999. The Union State records the common political, economic, military, and defense relations between Belarus and Russia, as well as the integration processes. Today, Belarus is the most important political, military, and economic ally of Russia. During the 21st century, Lukashenko did a lot to integrate the country as closely as possible with Russia. In addition to the political system, this can be traced back into historical reasons, during which the Belarusian nation generally lived in oppression under the powers to the west, Lithuanians, Poles, Germans, while under Russian control, it always developed a lot and had its own national identity and relatively more freedom, especially in Soviet times. In addition, under the leadership of Alexander Lukashenko, Belarus has become one of the most repressive countries in Europe. Human rights are constantly violated, there is no free press, and the opposition is constantly persecuted. In many cases, Belarus is even rated lower than Russia in current democracy surveys. Although more and more Belarusians have opposed the regime of Alexander Lukashenko, especially in recent years, the country still faces many challenges if it wants to reduce Russian influence on its territory. Economically, Belarus is significantly dependent on Russia, and there is also a very serious linguistic problem. In Belarus, the use of the Russian language significantly displaces the Belarusian language. Based on the map, it can be seen that in many areas of Belarus, not Belarusian but Russian is used as the first language. In the largest cities, such as Minsk, Gomel, Mogilev, Vitebsk or Brest, Russian is the primary mother tongue of 70 to 90% of the residents there. Currently, there is no university in Belarus where you can study any faculty in Belarusian language. This strong Russification that is present in Belarus makes it very questionable whether the country will be able to break away from Russia in the near future. Moreover, due to the current political relations, it is not even excluded that Belarus will be annexed by the Russians in the near future and will lose its independence and become part of Russia. Currently, Belarus is the only country in Europe that is in a political, economic and military alliance with Russia. However, there is another country that is politically not officially an ally of Russia, but due to cultural and religious similarities and the same social opinions, it can rightly be said to be a country that maintains good relations with Russia, and this country is none other than Serbia. Serbia is a South Slavic country located on the Balkan Peninsula, which has been in close cooperation with Russia for a long time. Its cultural and religious cooperation with Russia can be traced back to several centuries. In both countries, the Eastern Orthodox religion is dominant. The really strong cooperation between the Serbians and the Russians developed in the second half of the 19th century. After the Russo-Turkish War of 1877-1878, Serbia became independent along with many other Balkan nations. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, Serbia and Bulgaria competed for dominance in the Balkans. The Bulgarians, who refer to their former historical greatness, were supported by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, while the Serbians, who refer to Slavic unity, were supported by the Russian Empire. When Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia in 1914 after the assassination of Habsburg Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, the Russian Empire was the first country to declare war on the monarchy and came to Serbia's aid. After the First World War, the Serbians became the dominant nation in the Balkans. With the exception of the Bulgarians, all South Slavic nations were united into one state, which has been called Yugoslavia since 1929. In the course of the Second World War in 1941, the Germans, together with the Hungarians and the Croats, defeated Yugoslavia in just 8 days, and in the following years there were guerrilla fights in the area. Yugoslavia was finally liberated by Josip Broz Tito's partisans in 1944-45, just as the Soviet Red Army was driving the Germans out of Central Eastern Europe. After the war, the Socialist Yugoslavia was established under the leadership of Josip Broz Tito, which, despite being socialist, remained neutral during the Cold War. Although the relationship between the former Soviet leader Joseph Stalin and Tito deteriorated, later on Yugoslavia maintained good relations with the Soviet Union. The situation in Yugoslavia began to deteriorate starting in 1980 after the death of Tito. The stability of the country decreased and nationalist and chauvinistic views spread rapidly among the various nationalities. The result of this was that the Yugoslav War broke out in 1991, which resulted in the disintegration of the country. First, the fighting took place in Croatia, including in Vukovar and Dubrovnik. The Croatians fought for independence, while the Serbians aimed to gain the Serbian-inhabited areas and create a large and unified Serbian state. The bloodiest phase of the war took place between 1992 and 1995 in Bosnia. The Bosnian Serbs, who live in the north, northwest and east of Bosnia, first attacked the areas inhabited by Croatians and Bosniaks and then an armed conflict broke out between the latter two nations. All three sides, Bosniaks, Croatians, and Serbians, have committed numerous war crimes or even genocide against the civilian population living in Bosnia. The Bosnian Serb separatists were continuously supported by the Serbian government in Belgrade, as they too had an interest in the Bosnian Serbs either becoming independent or joining Serbia. The war in Bosnia has finally ended in 1995 with the Dayton Agreement. During the war, Western public opinion increasingly sided with the Croatians and Bosniaks, while Russia provided the Serbians with numerous military and humanitarian aid. However, in 1999, another conflict broke out, this time in Kosovo, where the Albanian population living there wanted to achieve succession from the Serb-ruled Yugoslavia. By then, the Serbian regime had sent a large number of military and police forces to the region, who began the ethnic cleansing of the Albanian population. After that, fighting began between Serbian soldiers and members of the Kosovo-Albanian terrorist organization, the UÇK. Many civilians lost their lives in the fighting, and both sides committed serious genocides and crimes against humanity. The final phase of the war was marked by NATO's military aggression, when it bombed Yugoslavia for 3 months in 1999. As a result of the bombings, hundreds of civilians lost their lives, and, in addition to military targets, numerous civilian and industrial buildings were also destroyed by the NATO bombing in the Serbian territories. After that, Kosovo came under the control of the United Nations, and then Kosovo announced its independence in 2008, which Serbia has not recognized since then. As a result of historical and geopolitical events, especially what happened recently, the majority of Serbian society thinks differently about certain topics compared to other European nations. The NATO bombing in 1999 has left a deep wound in Serbian society to this day, which therefore views the West as an enemy with considerable antipathy. This is only compounded by the current situation in Kosovo. Kosovo is supported by NATO and the West, while Eastern powers such as Russia and China are on Serbia's side. Unlike the West, Russia has helped Serbia many times throughout history and is still on the side of the Serbians in many geopolitical situations. Due to past and present events, Serbian and Russian societies have many similarities. Both nations are characterized by national pride, and religion plays an important role. The former socialist times are also viewed with significant nostalgia. Russians refer to the Soviet times, while Serbians refer to the Yugoslav times. Due to the events of the past, nationalism based on grievances has developed in both nations, and in addition to the Russians, it is also characteristics of the Serbians that they often voice grievances that they have had to go through in history, and it is characteristics of them to criticize other nations for this and spread false stereotypes about them. On the other hand, Serbians and Russians rarely or never admit to the crimes they have committed, and due to the lack of adequate information, many Serbians and Russians do not even know about the atrocities committed by the aforementioned two nations. In addition, the theory of Pan-Slavism is present in both Serbian and Russian society, in the case of the South Slavs in the former, and in the case of the Eastern and Western Slavs in the latter. Both the Russian and the Serbian nations feel superior and feel that they must assume a leading role either regionally or in the world. Russian and Serbian unity is an important topic, since in the 21st century, many Russian and Serbian residents live as minorities in other neighboring countries. In addition, both Russia and Serbia tend to criticize other nations for their treatment of minorities, while neither of these two countries treats their own minorities within their territory the best, the Russians with the numerous ethnic groups, or the Serbians with the Hungarians living in Vojvodina. The close ties between the Serbian and Russian nations are very strong, and they have not been shaken even after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. Alexander Vučić, the president of Serbia, although he condemned the Russian aggression in words, stated that he will not introduce sanctions against Russia as he believes that 85% of the population of Serbia supports Russia. Although these figures are somewhat exaggerated, Vučić is well aware of the Serbians' attitude towards Russians. According to analysts, 60 to 70% of the Serbian society is currently on the side of Russia and the Russian government in the war in Ukraine. In addition, 80 to 90% of Serbians still have a very positive opinion on Russia, and many of them directly regard the Russians as brothers of the Serbian nation. That is, unlike Belarus, which is politically and economically closely related to Russia, in Serbia it is the social, historical and cultural bonds that form a close relationship with Russia. If we want to compare how strong the friendship between Serbians and Russians is, it is the same as other European examples such as the Polish-Hungarian, Finnish-Estonian and English-French friendship. Although the Serbian government is politically neutral, they maintain good economic relations with Russia to this day. In Serbia, there are many investments and developments created by the Russians, such as in the energy industry and transport. In addition, Russia is still one of Serbia's most important allies in the issue of Kosovo, and the Russians still consider the area a part of Serbia. Since the war in Ukraine broke out, certain ethnic conflicts have been renewed in the Balkans. The Serbians living in Kosovo have demonstrated several times against Kosovo in the northern part of the country, while in Bosnia, the current Bosnian Serb leadership is working more and more openly to make Republika Srpska independent from Bosnia and join Serbia. Analysts fear that even more wars may break out in the Balkans as a result of this in the near future, in which Serbia may play the role of Russia to commit aggression and violence in order to become a major power in the Balkans. All in all, Belarus and Serbia are currently the only countries in Europe that continue to support Russia. While Belarus is a political ally, Serbia has close social ties with Russia. The two countries also have in common that they would find it difficult to break away from their Russian ties. While Belarus is in a difficult situation from an economic point of view, Serbia is in a difficult situation from a social point of view. Moreover, until Alexander Lukashenko's dictatorship is overthrown in Belarus and the situation in Kosovo continues in Serbia, no changes will occur in these two countries. At the end of the video, however, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that despite the fact that people in Belarus and Serbia mostly see Russia positively, there may of course also be Belarusian and Serbian people who think negatively about Russia, or at least about the Russian government. Nationality does not determine the thinking and personality of a given person. How a given person thinks is primarily determined by the search for information the person pursues, as well as the everyday environment around the given person. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, click the like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on the channel's latest content. If you have thoughts about this topic mentioned in the video, feel free to write your opinion in the comment section below. Goodbye and see you in the next video.